Welcome to Root Shock, the show standing at the intersection of healing and liberation. I'm your host, Hannah Titus. I'm a social scientist, a holistic health writer, and a yoga instructor. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've returned, welcome back. Root Shock now has a new segment called Rituals, a somatic space and collection of guided meditation practices designed to accompany the conversations here on the Core Podcast. The inaugural episode of Root Shock Rituals is live now, so head over to the Substack and check it out. And it's Pride Month, y'all, so happy Pride, and congratulations to my good friends and comrades O and P for their wedding. May the mountains shelter you, the rivers nourish you, and the winds bring you good tidings as you embark on your union together. I'm wishing spectacular love stories for all the girls, gays, and theys listening today and every day this Pride Month. As June rolls in and the snow melt up in the mountains begins to thaw and trickle down through mountain streams, and the water in lowland rivers and streams and lakes begins to heat up and become accessible for the body to encounter, swim, and play in, I'm thinking a lot about water. And lately, my thinking, my writing, and my scholarship has been very influenced by a book called Theory of Water by Dr. Leanne Bidasomuse Simpson. You're going to hear me reference this book frequently in the coming months because it's really, really good. Simpson combines Anishinaabe Indigenous wisdom with insights and poetic encounters from the Black feminist and Black radical traditions. And she does so in a way that is as flowing, as poetic, as bioavailable as water itself. I really encourage you to pick up a copy, Theory of Water, at an independent bookseller near you or online. If you pick up this anti-fascist, anti-racist, indigenous, and Black feminist book from Daddy Bezos, the sprightly gay fairies of Pride Month are going to come knock on your door in the night and sit you down on your couch and say, listen, baby, we got to have a talk about where you put your money during this revolution, okay? Okay, not in Pride Month. Don't be giving Jeffrey Bezos your money during Pride Month. Give your money to independent booksellers, y'all. Anyway, in this book, the author draws from deep listening to water, whether it be water in the form of snow, of ice, of river, of sea, or even listening to water as it takes form in our own bodies and our own breaths. And in doing so, Simpson builds a theory of Nibi, which is water in her native language. And she asks the central question, what does it mean to believe in water? This central question comes from Black feminist Dion Brand, who was one of the core editors of this book. An excerpt from her poem reads, I do not have day, and I do not have moonlight. I do not believe in time. I do believe in water. To read an excerpt. All genders and all forms of life have a relationship with water. Water droplets in our breath connect us intimately. Anishinaabe think of water as the lifeblood of the earth. We think of the Great Lakes as internal organs that filter and clean water before sending it along the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. In this sense, the health of the Great Lakes is akin to the health of our own kidneys and liver. Nibi offers us an invitation to learn from its embodied practice, a practice of cycling that is global, is permeable, and brings about a continuous rebirth on our planet. Nibi asks us to ground ourselves intimately in land and place, and relate that grounding to other movements, geographies, cultures, and lands. Nibi, water, is iterative, resilient, and transformative as it carves out spaces from rock over thousands of years. And water, Nibi, is interdependent and decentralized, a vessel for multitudes of land and water-based species and communities. And finally, water and Nibi always create more possibilities to propel a continuous global rebirth of life. Nibi is inside us, and it connects us to all forms of life on the planet. This episode is an exploration of water as a living, healing relative. It's juicy. Y'all, it's juicy and it's long, and I couldn't bear to cut it. Here, I interview Jessica Swann, daughter of Chief Jesse Swann, sacred pipe holder of the Beaver Clan and member of the Piscataway tribe here in southern Maryland. You'll learn more about the family of people that has stewarded this land for generations since first contact with settler colonizers on what is now Washington, D.C. and southern Maryland. And just like a ride down the river, this conversation wanders, tumbles, floats, and eddies. We may start with the Potomac River, but the river carries us down through topics like food sovereignty, data sovereignty, the importance of oral histories, dolphins in the river, and so much more. And as we see in this episode, water connects us all. It connects different ideas to one another. It connects communities. It connects ourselves within our bodies. It connects all different parts of our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual beings. So grab a paddle and come float with us down the Potomac River as we take a look at this waterway through Piscataway eyes. We love to open Root Shock with a sense of groundedness, a sense of community, and an honoring of the lands we're on. So where are you joining us from today, Jessica?
I am here currently in Washington, D.C. These are the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway Conoy tribe. I am a DMV, Maryland, born and raised, never left. It'll take a stick of dynamite to get me out of here. I really have a closeness with my ancestors and my relatives here that guide me through these times and have guided me through my life and continue to guide me through the future. So I'll be here listening to them as far as they lead me. I'm of the Beaver Clan, daughter of Chief Jesse J. Swann Jr., direct descendant of Chief Wanos, the chief of first contact when the Jesuits arrived in St. Mary's City in the 1600s for colonization of the state of Maryland. I also serve as the sacred pipe holder for my family, as well as a newly elected tribal council member for our tribal government.
Thank you for situating us to that. What does a sacred pipe holder do?
So essentially, I'm involved in the rituals, whether it's laying our relatives to rest or whether it's celebrating accomplishments or monumental moments. There are practices that have been taught to me from my elders that they've entrusted me to share that knowledge and to share those practices, but also as the peacekeeper amongst our community and amongst intertribal relationships, as well as relationships between the tribal community and non-tribal members.
Thank you. Who are the Piscataway, or rather the Piscataway Conoy? What's the distinction? Who are they? And what do people need to know about your history?
The direct definition of Piscataway is where the waters blend. And that is the explanation of where the freshwater and brackish water of the Potomac and Chesapeake blend together. And our people were the people of first contact here in the state of Maryland, then known as just Piscataway people. We fall into the Algonquian family. The word Conoy comes a little bit later on, which that is whenever some of the members made a migration out of the state of Maryland and joined other tribes for protection. However, the tri-core families of the tribe, these Swanns, Thompsons, and Proctors, all stayed here in southern Maryland, and we continued to maintain our identities here until we started to see a revitalization many years later to continue telling our story. And when we were granted state recognition in the state of Maryland back in 2012, that's whenever you started to see a little bit of a distinction between the Piscataway Conoy and the Piscataway Indian Nation, both of which fall under Piscataway people, but just two separate identities within our community. It's not uncommon that you see with other Native communities, different bands or things like that. I am an enrolled member of the Piscataway Conoy tribe. I'm the daughter of Chief Jesse J. Swann Jr., direct descendant of Wanos, who was the chief, also known as a Tayak. You'll hear that term used interchangeably throughout history in reference to the one in power at first contact, whenever Father Andrew White and the Jesuits, as well as Lord Baltimore, arrived in Maryland back in the 1600s.
So your community really is one of the first groups to meet European contact and to begin forging those relationships several hundred years
Absolutely.
ago.
Absolutely.
As you've mentioned, Piscataway means where the waters meet. And calling from downtown DC, we're
Yep.
situated on the edge of the Potomac River. And it's my understanding that the word Potomac, which is the main waterway for drinking water for Washington, D.C., parts of Maryland and Virginia, that Potomac is an anglicized version of the Algonquin word Patawomac.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that word and what significance that name carries?
The waterways were our life, not just here in Maryland on this side of the river in that native community, but also across the river. This is how we had our livelihood. We were known to be skilled watermen, fishermen, hunters, gatherers, and that's really how we were able to sustain for the amount of time that we were, whether it was pre-colonial days through colonial times or even into modern history. The use of the river and the presence of the river in our community and how it has allowed us to sustain as a people, there aren't words to describe the importance of the river.
And that's exactly what I hope we can dig into today. This episode was inspired by my own relationship with the river and feeling called during a chapter of physical, emotional, and spiritual healing in my life, going to the river day after day just to find a sense of groundedness, nourishment, and cleansing. And it made me so sad to see how polluted this river was, this river that, of course, is intrinsically linked to our health as we get all of our drinking water from it. And this is before the catastrophic sewage spill in January that brought raw sewage into this waterway. And it really made me want to spend time with deeper understandings of what waterways can mean to a people. There's not a lot of people speaking for the river as a relative, speaking of the river as a community member. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, is to get a Piscataway Conoy perspective on this river in your own words. How would you describe this relationship to the Patawomac River?
The waterways are life. That's what it is. Whether you look at that as a form of nourishment, as your source of nourishment, whether you look at that as a place to find solace and to have spiritual healing and connection, or whether you use it as in a very functional way of our day-to-day needs for water. I never really understood why, as a little girl, why I was so connected and so in love with everything about the Potomac. I've seen many stages of this river throughout my life. I've seen it to be one of the most polluted rivers in the area. I've seen it to where other people say, "Oh, you get in there and swim," or things like that. But I truly believe that it is my ancestors and my relatives of the past that have kept me connected to this waterway in all aspects. I grew up fishing that river. I grew up boating, gathering, and just walking the river and really having an understanding of the importance of what happens if this is no longer here. And the idea of conservation and preservation of that space has been instilled to me since I was a child of we can't take this for granted. This is what sustained our ancestors and this is what will continue to sustain future generations, but you have to take care of it and you have to honor it.
You're speaking to my heart, because as a river gal, I also was born and raised on the banks of a river. And I totally understand what it is to just be in love with this river
Yeah.
and to feel the river in all of its seasons and in all of its eras of cleanliness and pollution, whether that's coming from humans or just coming from nature's cycles and seasons. I really get that.
Yeah. Generationally, there's always been a connection to the water in one form or another. We have to preserve the river. We have to treat it with respect. We have to make sure that we nurture it the way that it has always nurtured our people.
I see that theme emerging again and again in the conversations I'm having, this idea of mutual responsibility. And I would say dumping I think it was over 1 million pounds of raw sewage directly into the waterway. I don't think that counts as respectful. I'm not a river
That
expert, but that doesn't read respect to me. Just stank water directly, just directly into the waterway.
I'm going to go out on a limb and co-sign on that. It's
Yeah.
not a respectful way.
Yeah, I'm not really sure that we love a stanky river and all the fish and all the birds covered in fecal matter. When stuff like this happens, like this major sewage spill that took place in January, when something like that happens, how is that felt in your community?
It's a continued almost slap in the face to our community that once again, you've taken something from us. All of our land was taken from us. Our waterways were taken from us throughout history and throughout colonialism. That's a fact. And then for it to be continued, this type of neglect to something that's so sacred to our community, particularly, but also such an important feature and factor for the entire state of Maryland, DC, and Virginia. It's just a blatant level of disrespect that just continues to add a layer of distrust between our community and those that are above us and in charge.
I hear that. I'm curious, were there, when your tribe first made contact with Europeans, were there agreements or treaties made, especially as it pertained to ongoing care for people and land in this area?
Absolutely. There were numerous broken treaties, all of which for the state of Maryland have not been reinstated. It wasn't until 2022, 2023 that we were even able to get a partial reinstatement of the Treaty of 1616. My father, Chief Jesse Swann, and Piscataway Indian Nation matriarch Julie Tyack, they were able to speak with DC government and work towards partial reinstatement of our fishing rights throughout the District of Columbia. In the state of Maryland, we still do not have fishing rights. We have to go and apply for fishing licenses the same way as everybody else. And these are our ancestral homelands. This is the way that our community sustained. And to be honest, if we're going to be really clear, there wouldn't be a state of Maryland had it not been for the Piscataway. The Piscataway ancestral land expands from the western bank of the Chesapeake all the way into the panhandle of West Virginia, into Northern Virginia, so that the amount of counties that are there, the amount of river that is there, the amount of land that is there, this is our birthright. This is what we should not have to have a conversation that we don't even have the right to hunt and fish our lands.
Part of the irony there being that fishing licenses exist in the name of regulation and conservation so that people do not over extract and so that people fish responsibly. The irony being that the governing body that's issuing those licenses is not respecting the area, and the people that they're saying need a license, like you and your community, have been stewarding this area successfully for generations longer than any of these folks have been on the scene.
Isn't that always how it works? Right now, that's a really hot topic for me. One of our Piscataway youth who is pursuing law school and is actually actively working with one of the Maryland state delegates has asked me to mentor her in a project that will be approaching the Maryland state government in Annapolis for reinstatement of the hunting and fishing rights to the Piscataway Conoy enrolled members, the Piscataway people, Piscataway Indian Nation. This is all encompassing for Piscataway people. This is going to be a long project. This is going to be a lot of work. However, this is an opportunity for us to also keep our tribal youth engaged in what it means to work for advocacy towards rights of our people, to also understand how things work in reference to our governing body with our state of Maryland, but also to see how a relationship can work between tribal government and non-tribal government. So the ultimate goal of this project is to reinstate the hunting and fishing rights in the state of Maryland to the Piscataway peoples.
And why is having your hunting and fishing rights reinstated critical to Piscataway health and well-being?
It's critical to health and well-being because it also teaches the ideals of food sovereignty. So what this does is it continues to allow us to teach culturally appropriate, culturally relevant, and just overall cultural practices of gathering, hunting, processing our native and traditional foods that also are It's an organic way for people to really get involved and know where their food is coming from. This has been a hot topic throughout the last few years, particularly that we don't know what's in our food, and we're seeing all of these negative effects of what's in our food that is produced for mass consumption, causing health problems that are long term that otherwise may or may not have been introduced to particular communities. Things like diabetes, high blood pressure. These are things that we see particularly popping up in minority communities and communities of color because of the food sources that are available to those communities and the knowledge of nutrition that is given to those communities. This has been going on for generations. This has been going on for a long time. We see a lot of foods that are heavy in particularly native diets that are heavy on native menus, but they're foods of oppression. They're foods that this is why we eat it because that's all we had. And that type of control and just blind trust in big food production, we have to draw the line at some point, and we have to continue to teach future generations how to sustain the way that our ancestors sustained to get us here.
I feel like conversations about food sovereignty are like what paleo diet wishes it was. Like
Sure.
paleo, I think I can make this joke because I'm trained as an anthropologist. So like all of the people that are like ancestral diet, we should return to our roots. I'm like, okay, first of all, there's no single historic universal ancestral diet.
And there's not.
And there just isn't. It's heterogeneous like across history. And also like, how are we going to talk about the return to sovereign food if we're not talking about power? Because if you just say, I'm going to go paleo, it just becomes, and I'm going to continue to consume the mystery meat that is packaged in plastic that was transported on a truck from unknown miles from an unknown factory, from an unknown farm to get to here. Yum, yum, delicious. I'm just like my ancestors.
So, absolutely. And that's the conversation that really nobody wants to have in the sense of if I put a farm fresh chicken in front of a certain brand that has a processing plant out on the Eastern Shore chicken that we buy in big name grocery stores, they look very different, but people aren't ready to have that conversation. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a homesteader, that everyone needs to raise all of their own food. I understand. I get it. However, sharing the knowledge to our future generations, particularly in my community, is how the story stays alive. If we don't continue to teach this to our youth and really think about what impact these types of decisions and this knowledge will have on the next 7 generations, then the Piscataway story will end. And that's not a worry that is unique to just the Piscataway people. That is a fear and a realization, a reality that if we do not continue to share our cultural knowledge to the next generations, the knowledge dies.
Can you explain to a listener that might not be familiar what this concept is that you're pointing to of being a good ancestor and the importance of oral traditions for the next 7 generations?
Absolutely. As a young elder, the importance is every person can think to themselves a point in time, whether it was a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a relative, a family friend that tells a story of how things were in the past or how things were or a specific incident. It might be a funny instance. It might be a story that bears some emotional significance. They share this story, and then you find yourself playing that game that we all played when we were kids, telephone, where then you tell someone. And the importance of that is it keeps those stories alive. It keeps that history going. Recently, I've come into a situation with a local agency in Southern Maryland where I was told that oral histories do not carry an appropriate level of importance or significance to be held into consideration for changing the name of a town, a highway, a school. I was told that oral histories that surround the derogatory nature of where that name came from is not justified as reason to change because there's nothing written.
On today's episode of imperialism and the written language as a form of knowledge and power retention. Okay.
And that's,
Sure.
we can see it in every community that oral histories are of importance. But whenever you have people in charge, people above you that feel that's not a good enough reason, that's the reason why it's important that these oral histories do stay alive. Because if there's a whole community telling you, no, this is the history that we know to be true, there's a little bit more of a push than just the one person sharing what they heard. It's very important that we share the history so that way there is no time for those that are in higher power or above us to change the narrative to suit what they want it to be or what they want it to mean.
Let's take a break for some critical context. Now, your skepticism radar might be going off right now, saying, wait, hold up. But information gets distorted during games of telephone all the time. Are these two saying that the written word isn't important? First of all, love that you're skeptical. Do your own research, question what we say, keep asking these questions critically. And we are not harping on the values of the written word here in this episode because they are self-evident, and we already live in a culture that venerates the written word. And there are so many obvious ways that the written word improves our lives. It makes it easier to disseminate movement-making rhetoric. It helps us communicate complex ideas, to document history, and the written word allows us to do a lot of technical stuff too, to make tables and numbers and data that isn't always translatable verbally. It has different strengths than oral histories have. And the written word has always been associated with power. Let's have some facts, shall we? Let's have some facts. Fact number 1, universal literacy is not guaranteed. At present, only 79% of U.S. adults are considered literate, and over half, 54% of U.S. adults read below a 6th grade level. Okay, so we already have a deficiency of literacy in this country. And historically, inequities in education have been enforced by the state. Enslaved people in the United States were generally not allowed to read or write. Throughout the antebellum period, Southern states enacted strict anti-literacy laws that prohibited teaching enslaved people to read or to write. These laws punished both the teacher and the student. Frederick Douglass described literacy as the pathway from slavery to freedom, recognizing the power of the written word and recognizing that Southern slave states didn't want Black folks organizing and spreading revolutionary ideas. Like, this was an explicit rationale for white lawmakers to keep enslaved people illiterate, was we can't have them organizing. So keeping people out of written history was a part of the way that oppressive power structures were allowed to continue to exist. At such times, people only had their oral histories to communicate all of the things that would otherwise have gone forgotten. And that's where the importance of oral histories come in, is because when a disenfranchised group is not allowed or permitted access to their own historical texts, well, we got to fill in the blanks somewhere. And we can fill in the blanks with drum, with story, with performance, with inflection, with art that accompanies the oral telling. Okay, so I digress. Written records are strong in that they often provide facts, dates, events, while oral histories are strong in the sense that they provide the social, emotional, and personal context to those events And they can absolutely convey historical events with accuracy, especially in traditions where storytelling is the primary mode of historical preservation. And we forget that nuance. Like, we're living in a society that puts a primacy on the written word. And so we assume that oral storytelling is just casual around the table and like it's just gossip. But it's not. Indigenous groups exist today that don't have a written language. Like, their language is only oral. They take storytelling very seriously because it is the primary historic record. So we need to not paint like all people and all cultures across time with this broad ethnocentric colonial brush. Yeah, that's part of white supremacy, putting this primacy on the written word when plenty of humanity has been doing without it for a long time. Anyway, in short, we need both written and oral histories to offer a holistic understanding of humanity's past. And that's why we're talking about it today. So thank you for sticking with me as I explained all of that. Now, back to the show. There's an artist who I will link in the show notes who put forth 10 tenets of white supremacy culture. And one of those tenets is an over-reliance and primacy of the written word. And we see that play out in the sciences, in policy, in the work that you've just described. This putting on a pedestal of that which is written over oral traditions. And what is so goofy about that is they're treating it like it is immovable fact, but the written word is subject to propaganda just like everything else. We're living in an information age right now where primary media outlets are held by a few very powerful people. And so you don't have to think very far to wonder, okay, if they're saying that we should not value, that we should cease to value oral histories in our community of how things were, who profits from that?
Historically, the written word is written by the oppressor.
Truth.
So for you to tell me that the derogatory connotation around certain names isn't valid because it's only been told to me by oral history, that is continuation of the oppression that our people have experienced since first contact.
It's like a subtle psychological way to keep you under the boot, isn't it? Like every time you drive on that road, every time you travel that highway, that waterway, out west, every time we climb some of these major mountains, you don't get to hear the name that it's been called for thousands of years by people that respected, loved, and cherished that mountain, that respected, loved, and cherished that path or that river. You get to hear the white guy that climbed it 100 years ago. In my research on the Potomac, on the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, I've come across some scientists that have said that there is evidence of dolphins in the Potomac swimming up from the Chesapeake Bay. And they've said that there may have been more dolphins in the past in the Potomac River, which for listeners that do not live in the Potomac waterways, that is mind boggling because it's not a place you would think a dolphin wants to frolic. However, in that research, already they're coming up against these gaping areas in the scientific literature, which are the exact weak points of only relying on the written word that we've just described. So I was curious, as you've talked about the significance of oral histories, if you have any insight into dolphins in the Potomac or Chesapeake Bay?
I've seen them.
You've seen them.
I've seen them in the Potomac. When I was younger, there were reports of dolphins coming up the Potomac. So it's in the very southern portion of the Potomac where the Patuxent and the Potomac kind of come together. But as a child, I do remember seeing them. There's been lots of reports of dolphins still coming up into the Potomac, not as far north as National Harbor or DC proper, but this is just another example of why the oral histories should be held in the same regard that written work is held. I'm talking mid-90s. I saw dolphins in the Potomac. So if I saw them and I remember it, I can only imagine how many other people throughout this region in their life either heard about somebody seeing them, saw them themselves. But these are the types of things that just because it's written, that it doesn't support dolphins in this area or even other types of wildlife and aquatic life. Just because the written work doesn't support that doesn't necessarily make it true because there are still areas of unknown. However, if oral histories were factored in and storytelling was regarded in the same way, we would know more, we would have more explanation to things, and it wouldn't just be a black and white, no, this can't be, this isn't the case.
I also think that oral histories help buffer us a little bit. They help buffer us a little bit against environmental amnesia, right?
Yeah.
This idea that each consecutive generation has a different baseline for what pristine nature looks like. Because if you don't have stories and you're not a full-time scientist that's like deep in the weeds of the literature, you might walk out to your backyard where there are no more lightning bugs and no more bees and no more dolphins in the river and say, what a beautiful day. Everything is as it should be.
But to add on to that, the sharing of oral histories and the way that in the context that we're speaking of, it also holds a level of accountability because then you're not just blindly taking the written work that is given to us or the information that is given to us. You're not just taking it because you have nothing to compare it to or you have nothing to think back on that contradicts any of this in any way. Not that I'm saying that propaganda is pushed on us, but
Who would say that? Say that, corporate overlord.
it adds a layer of accountability because once again, if you have pockets of people, pockets of community that know something to be true and they're being told, no, that never happened, then the story will continue to get bigger and that oral history will continue to be spread because then it turns into, can you believe that they're telling me this didn't happen? I wholeheartedly believe that the oral histories adds a level of accountability. There's no way to hold someone 100% accountable. There's absolutely no way in any aspect of life. However, by sharing history, by having conversations, documenting what you can, but having the conversations with multiple people at multiple points of life, multiple generations, multiple times, it allows the conversation to continue. And like I said, it adds a layer of accountability instead of just accepting what you're being told to be true simply because you don't have anything to compare it to.
And I think what's a little bit silly about this process is detractors, such as those that you described that didn't take oral histories as significant sources for renaming derogatory names for highways and waterways. It's a little bit goofy because part of doing good science is to take in multiple sources critically and use observation through many different sources. So, as you're describing, when you only take in one form of data, written information that's been funded and peer reviewed and published, that's important data. It's a scientific imperative that you also take in the lived experience of the people that were actually there. That is still a scientific process of understanding the world around us. And I feel like that applies to food sovereignty, as you described earlier. It applies to ecological knowledge, as we're thinking about now. And it made me think about accessibility as a factor because I live and work in the sciences, sometimes more medical sciences, sometimes more social sciences. But for an example, I'll think about lightning bugs. I grew up as a kid in the river valleys of Ohio catching lightning bugs, as many people did.
No one anymore now, are there?
There are not. There are not as many out there right now. And every year less. Same with the bees. We know more about the bees because bees get more funding because they're important pollinators. But like, sure, I couldn't run around barefoot without getting a bee sting in the summer in the 90s. And now we're looking for the bees. We're saving the bees. We're selling bee plushies to save the bees. I even saw I saw a Groupon for lightning bug gazing the other day. Like a Groupon is going to capitalize on the scarcity of these lightning bugs so that you can have a lightning bug experience. And if we didn't have oral history, if we didn't have people like you or I or community members saying, here's how the lightning bugs used to be, like, let's figure out what they need and what they don't have and how to bring them back. If all we had was written word science, Think about it. It takes an immense amount of funding to create that science. And then it takes an immense amount of funding to access that science. And I think that's what often like the lay public doesn't get to hear about is how much money, how much power and funding you have to have and backing from an institution or a pharmaceutical company or a scientific endowment, how much money you have to create, quote, good science in a peer reviewed journal. And then how much money or institutional affiliation you have to then access that peer reviewed paper in the journal. I'll tell you, I lost my institutional access when NIH went under, and I'm telling you, it is hard to find good research as a civilian.
Yeah, it is. It's funny that you bring up NIH and accessibility to reports. The National Institute of Health actually did some research with the Piscataway in the 60s and 70s.
Ooh.
That the documents we don't have access to. We don't have any access to that data that was compiled about different pockets and health issues and traits that you saw within those pockets. We don't have access to those reports. We don't have access to that information. And that goes into a bigger issue of data sovereignty. You got all this information about our community and about these people, and we don't even get to dictate what it's used for. We don't know what it's used for. And it doesn't take much to look back at history and see that, particularly in the medical field, there has been misuse of information and data collected in particular communities and demographics and diaspora. There's been misuse of information not for the benefit of said people. Whenever we talk about accessibility, that's such a broad thing that, like you said, a lot of people don't really understand lack of accessibility in the way that I'm speaking of. Sure, I would love to have a history book of the Piscataway, but that takes funding and that takes support. And throughout history, we've had a consistent message of, no, we don't want you to have that written down. No, that's not how it went. It's been obstacle after obstacle. Everybody wants us to have written history in order to validate what we're saying as oral histories. Systematically, we've been working on an uphill battle to get that, which, it just leads into the importance of the oral history, because if it wasn't for the oral history, there wouldn't be a history.
Truly.
We've got to save these stories and we've got to save this oral history, because without it, you're literally just going to have the narrative of whoever's on top, whoever the winner is.
Exactly. History is written by the victors. You will have the narrative of whoever is on top. And some people say that oral history isn't as reliable as written history. To those people, I'd like to ask, how do you think history existed on Turtle Island for the last 14,000 years?
Yeah.
Can you find me a 14,000-year-old book? A 14,000-year-old USB drive that has all the Word documents? And I'll take a quick aside to explain for listeners that might not really know what the data sovereignty movement is all about, because maybe they're not tuned in to what medical histories in the US kind of look like. So for listeners, gather round, children. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, is a central funding body for biomedical research in the United States. It is funded by tax-paying Americans to do research that benefits all of us. Historically, data is collected from marginalized communities, sometimes without consent, sometimes with consent. This has happened to the Black community with a lot of ethics violations. It's happened time and time again in Indigenous communities all over North America. And when federal bodies collect biodata, sometimes that's surveys, information about family histories, mental health histories, physical health histories. It can also include blood samples and physical samples. And this comes to be an issue because those communities lose access and control over how those samples are used, and can lose access and control into how that data gets shared back to the people that it is intended to benefit. So that can get really dangerous really fast if, like you've just shared, Jessica, your community 60 years ago offered data, a lot of data, into the health of your community, things that are so precious and so intimate and so private, with the understanding that your community would then receive benefit for years to come based on research, good research that got done. The problem arises when that research is not conducted with collaborative ethical frameworks, or when that research is not done transparently, or when, like you're saying, the people that gave that data no longer have access to that data. And I think it gets especially thorny in 2026 as we're living through an information age where AI algorithms are constantly being fed data as a form of capital, because now we've transformed into an era where like your precious private health data can now become somebody else's profit to no benefit of you or your community.
And that's the danger of AI, that a lot of people, there are benefits, there are pros and cons to everything. But that's the danger of artificial intelligence. It's a dangerous game to play because you lose control of what information is being put into these algorithms and who exactly has access to it, why they have access to it, and what are they doing with it. In 2026, with the topic of data centers and AI and all of these things, it's hard to have a conversation and not bring an awareness to the dangers of that. AI is more than just a caricature generator to see what you look like in your career or to create a flyer or an Instagram trend. There's a real danger with AI.
Absolutely. And AI uses a lot of water, so much fresh water, so very much fresh water.
Oh my.
Would otherwise be nourishing people and waterways and non-human relatives like the fish, like the birds, like the trees. Which brings us back to water. I've really enjoyed that we, like a river, we have really bent and flowed through many different topics as we've discussed. We've swirled in the eddies a little bit. We've gone over some waterfalls because I just get hype about critiquing power. I just can't help it. I want to bring us back as we float along down the river, thinking again about our core themes of water and health. So, as we've just spoken about health research and data, I want to get your perspective of what health actually means. What does it mean for a person to be healthy? And what is required for good health?
Good health, to me, would be sustainable. Are you living? Are you able to have breath in your lungs? Are you able to touch the water? Are you able to feel the grass? Are you able to be sustainable? Our people lived as stewards of the land and protectors of the water for hundreds of years. And they did that through good health and a good relationship and respect to the land and respect for the water, and really a deepened connection of the importance of that. And I think throughout time, we've lost the importance of our connection to the earth, to our waterways. And because of that, we've seen our health decline. We've seen the goalpost of what good health is just constantly be pushed back and pushed back. But we see big government and we see big food and big pharma pushing different information and different ideologies onto us and telling us this is what will make you healthy. To be healthy, you just have to be connected to the land, to the water, to the creator. You have to be able to sustain and be respectful. And that's where you find the good health.
To be healthy, you have to be connected.
Yeah.
That gets lost a lot in our individualized culture and research practices. Connection to land, connection to community, to ancestors, to some kind of spiritual connection, whatever it looks like for you. What you've shared, it makes me think of an offering from Dr. Nicole Redvers. I heard her speak at the National Consortium for Integrative Medicine in 2024 in the spring. Mm-hmm. Dr. Redvers is a Dene First Nations woman from Canada, and her plenary talk focused on our waterways. At the time, we were meeting in Cleveland, Ohio, so the waterway was Lake Erie. but it connects to the Potomac, where she was sharing. We know from Western science that our bodies are about 2/3 water, give or take, depends on the day. And we cycle through this water. We don't hang on to this water indefinitely. Like our bodies are a part of the water cycle. Our bodies are a part of raindrop to river to lake to ocean. And so she shared, after several months of living in a place, you are 2/3 that freshwater source. So in this case, after living in Washington, D.C. for a few months, you are 2/3 Potomac. So this idea of separation is not true on a biological level. I am carrying Potomac in my body right now. I dressed it up. I dressed it up
Better
with
or worse.
for better or worse. I dressed it up with some cucumbers in my water. I dressed it up with some electrolytes. I dressed it up with a water filter that took out some chlorine, but the water is with me. The river is a part of me. And so this idea that we can just out of sight, out of mind. Yes, the Potomac is the polluted, but we can continue at this pace. In my mind, that's not sustainable for health, because I don't know who we're kidding ourselves that like what magic wand gets waved at the water treatment plant. Yes, stuff gets cleaned out. Yes, raw sewage gets removed. Yes, it is chemically treated at the water treatment plant. Yay, we love not having cholera, but that doesn't mean the water is well. That doesn't mean the water is happy. That water doesn't mean the water is being treated well. And if a river is that disrespected in its own waterway, like how does that play out in your body when you drink that water?
Yeah, this is a topic that, like you said, out of sight, out of mind. No, it all gets taken care of at the water processing plant. Everything gets cleaned up, no problem. I would even go as far to say that many people are unaware that their water source, their drinking water source, is the Potomac. And it's something that people don't think of. In DC, in Maryland, in all of these areas of heavy development, you don't factor in that the more houses and buildings you build, the less ground surface is available for water to return to the aquifers, which that's what is your water source for your homes. That's your water source for your buildings. That's how you get your drinking water, is through aquifers and wells. And with all of this overdevelopment and continued development, we're just cutting down the ground area that this water can be absorbed back into the aquifers. Currently, there's a topic of a data center being put in the old Pepco power plant in Morgantown, Maryland. Now they're proposing to turn that into a data center and pull directly from the river as the water source. What is that going to do for the rest of us that are the amount of water that will need to be pulled from there? It's going to ruin the ecosystem of the river in that area. It's going to drastically cut the water available, the groundwater that is received from that area. What does it mean if, forbid, there's another sewage spill to the same magnitude that we just experienced in January further up the river? However, that portion of the river was closed. These are all things that I don't think that there's enough conversation about the ripple effect and the magnitude of what these ideas and this type of development and this type of greed and power of the dollar, what it does to our natural ecosystems and the waterways and the land and everything that has sustained civilization for this amount of time. If we continue to just drain it, literally drain it, there's not going to be anything left. And that includes civilization. We can't continue to move this way. We cannot continue to allow the Potomac to be out of sight, out of mind, to not consider the effects of all the waterways, what we're doing is having on all of the waterways and on the land in this area. It's not a problem that we can wait until tomorrow to deal with. Yeah, we have to do it now.
I think that really is just such a reminder. I work in the holistic health and medicine industry. And within this industry, of course, water is a topic of conversation, but most often it's a topic that's relegated to what is the best water filter for you. Should I buy a Brita? Should I buy reverse osmosis? Should I be drinking alkaline water? Like, those are the conversations we have. And all
Sure.
of those conversations are based on individual benefit, and they're based on profit and purchases. And it just drives me up a wall, not because I think everybody should have access to clean water, and emerging technologies around water absorbability and bioavailability and having technology to clean our water better. All of that, yes. And we're kidding ourselves if we think that I, as a working class individual that has made it X far and can now afford a fancy water filter, can now afford alkalinic water, that I can save myself, by taking just my drinking water and making it safe without holding accountability to the waterway and the broader ecosystem that I'm a part of. Because it's myopic to think that I will save this jug and this jug is clean and safe and just for me and I will be healthy. As if we're not all breathing the same air, as if we're not all bathing in the same water, as if we're not all collectively moving through this same ecosystem. And so I hope people hear your voice and hear this interview and come to think, like, who profits from me approaching water through buying things and saving myself versus who could profit from me taking a more collective, active stance in speaking up for the water. Because for the former, corporations and companies profit from you buying the fancy water filter.
Absolutely.
But who benefits when we stand up for the river?
Everyone.
Even the birds, even the plants, even the fish, like even the soil, like literally everyone. And gosh, I'm just, as you said at the beginning, I just am in love with the river. I'm just in love with her. I sing every time I'm there. I'm singing a song to the river, and it doesn't have very good lyrics, but I am doing my best. So I'd like to vision forward, Jessica, as we wind ourselves down and the river of our thoughts slows down a little bit. I'd like to vision forward towards what healing could mean if we were to truly support the health of this river and the people connected to it. What would need to change?
I can always say ways of consumption needs to change. There are plenty of conservancy groups. There are plenty of active waterway organizations that you can learn about. I wholeheartedly encourage everyone to connect with Potomac Conservancy and their projects and their initiatives and what they're doing and ways that you can support them, because they are a long-standing organization. It is their mission to do everything that they can for the waterway. I also encourage people to look into your local area, wherever you live, whatever waterways or sources of water. Also, I strongly encourage anyone and everyone to reach out to your local Native communities and see what you can do to support their initiatives. Anybody who is interested in learning more about the Piscataway Conoy tribe or the efforts of Through Piscataway Eyes, the tribally designated nonprofit that services the Piscataway Conoy community, you can always reach out to us and we'll be happy to share our initiatives of what our visions are for the waterways, what we continue to do as protectors of the water and stewards of the land, in any way that you can support.
Thank you for all of that. I'll be reaching out, and I hope everybody listening finds their local group and reaches out too. Oh my God. I'm hyped for this conversation. We need 3 more hours. Thank you, Jessica.
As always, I thank you for your time to allow me this opportunity to share my information, my thoughts, and my history of my culture. And as always, make sure that we take care of the land, take care of the water, everybody be safe. And thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Jessica. It was a treat. What a blast.
That's
Now, back to the day job that pays me.
Yeah.
As we gotta do. We gotta labor under capitalism, am I right? All right, on to our labors. Thanks for playing, everyone. I hope you had a nice paddle with us down the waters of the Potomac as we swish, swayed, and flowed through many different topics today. If this episode made you feel or think, please head over to the Substack and subscribe. And if you head over there, you'll find Root Shock Rituals, the new segment where I give you meditations and somatic practices to accompany the episodes here. So head on over, let me know what you think. I'm so grateful to all of you who have listened. So until next time, y'all, may you rest, resist, and use your gifts.